ended up getting a job at the Comedy Store answering the phones. I had looked around for a job for quite a while and just couldn't find one. I came out of a hotel next door, which used to be the Riot Hyatt, is what people called it, and didn't get the job there. Somebody else got it, and I just started talking to these guys in the parking lot, and the guy offered me a job answering phones at the store because he said I had a good voice. So I went in and started answering phones, and then they give you a couple of drink tickets at the end of your shift so you can stick around and watch the show. If everybody that works there stays, they've got another 20 people in the crowd or whatever. So I don't know. I was just telling a story. I think I had a couple of my shift drinks, and I was sitting upstairs telling a story about how I ended up in L.A., which is a very long and crazy story. And these guys, I had everybody laughing. They thought I was a comic. And the guy said, "Hey, well, how long have you been doing stand-up?" And I said, "I just started." And then he offered me to do his show that Friday. And I did, and that was it. My life was forever changed in that first 30 seconds of stand-up. I was like, wow, here I am. This is me, you know. And just told, you know, before anyone cared to interview me about it, I told the story a lot because it's, you know, it's just kind of a crazy story. Cash Cab turned my entire world upside down. It took over my life time-wise, and it just changed everything. I mean, just my existence was altered by Cash Cab. Like, it's pretty crazy when people first recognize you from something on TV, or just like everything's different in a 99.9% good way. It's awesome. It kind of feels like walking into a cartoon. You know, it's like for years I traveled doing stand-up, and every time you get off a plane at the airport, there's always people there to greet the other people on the plane, and you're like, well, no one here for me. But now I get off a plane, and people are like, hey, Ben, you know, hey, you know, so it's like, it's kind of nice. There's people to greet me wherever I go. Makes the road less lonely. So it totally changed my life in a lot of ways. It changed my stand-up in that people that were coming out to see me now had some expectation of what I would be as a comedian. Where before they had no expectations whatsoever. Now they have an expectation of what I'm going to be like, and it's not right. It's not the right expectation. They're expecting me to be the guy that hosts, you know, that I am when I was hosting Cash Cab, and they're just such different venues. They're just so different. I mean, I felt like I really wanted to be nice to everyone that got thrown into Cash Cab because they had no idea what they were getting into. People going to a comedy club know what they're getting into, for the most part, although there's been plenty of Cash Cab fans who come out to see me and they don't know what they're getting into. But it's just a totally different scenario. It's kind of, you know, say whatever you want. There's really no rules about what you can talk about, what you can do. So it's just a totally different environment. So I sort of had to, I mean, on a very basic level, I had to write jokes about Cash Cab. Because otherwise, people would be like, why isn't he talking about it? This is weird. This is what we know him for. We're out to see him. He's not talking about the show. So on a basic level, I had to write jokes about Cash Cab. On a deeper level, I had to sort of alter who I was as a comedian. Because I used to have a very deliberate cadence and a delivery that my writing played well into. I had this joke about filling out a job application when you put your name in the wrong box, and then I have to tell the guy that I live on Ben Bailey Boulevard because everything's off by one box, you know. So it was this delivery that sort of came along with that joke. It was very, very announcer, long, slow, drawn out, and then this, and then that, and it worked really well doing stand-up. But when I did that for Cash Cab fans, when they first started coming out to see me, they looked at me like, what is this guy doing? Why is he talking like that? You know, they're like, where's the guy from TV? Who's this weird, slow talker? So I totally had to just, dump that and start just talking, I guess.
So there's actually more than 25 different versions of Cash Cab around the world. Have you seen any of the other versions? And if you have, do you have a favorite?
I didn't know that there were that many. Well, actually, maybe I did. I remember saying, just weird, one day we're like, wow, Cash Cab is in, I think they said in almost 30 different countries or something.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I've never seen any of the other ones. I've seen pictures, you know, like screenshots of a couple of them, And they usually have a guy, like they try to just make it exactly like mine, and there's like a guy with a shaved head, and I'm like, okay. I wish I had time to watch them all and pick a favorite. That'd be awesome. Because it'd probably be really funny to watch them in a different language. I know that, like, our show, the New York show, was big on the internet and in a lot of places, and then they ended up making their own. Like, there's a Cash Cab in Russia because Cash Cab New York became this big internet phenomenon over there, which I had no idea until I was at a club in New York, and there's all these Russian people going crazy. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, you're Ben Bailey from Cash Cab. I'm like, how the hell do you guys know about that? So weird. Yeah, I know there's lots of them. The first one was in England, so that's actually the original, but they didn't have a real host. They just had a guy who drove the cab, and the cab actually, a computerized voice in the cab asked the questions. So it was very different from, we changed it quite a bit when we made it here.
So you obviously had to become a licensed taxi driver when you were doing the show, but you also have worked as a limo driver in the past, is that correct?
That is correct. I used to be a limo driver years ago. Awesome. When I started doing stand-up, I was driving limos.
Yeah. So how are those two experiences the same or even just different?
One sucks and the other one doesn't. No, I didn't mind driving limos. You have a lot of freedom in that job, and you can make some pretty good money. It's just driving. Driving is, as a way to make a living, is grueling. I don't know. I like driving limos. I always drove from the time I got my license. I just kind of drove in order to make money. And when I was a limo driver, I actually wrote a whole stand-up set and a sitcom around the idea of a bunch of limousine drivers. Because like if you're not driving, you're just sitting around in an office waiting to go out. And it's very funny. And limo drivers are often real characters. And so I had written this whole show about limo drivers, and I was very into the power of positive thinking at that point, and I was like, I'm going to keep picturing myself on a show starring me as a driver. I mean, and I'm talking 10 years before Cash Cab came around, and then, then here comes Cash Cab, and I'm like, all right, this isn't exactly what I had in mind, but it's pretty close. It's close enough that it makes me wonder if you can actually will things into happening. But so very different. I mean, driving, you never stop because you have to change tapes when you're actually driving a limo, and you don't pull over in front of a bar and have the entire bar empty out and surround you in the street. That never happened when I was driving a limo.
Right.
But the driving part is the same. It can be fun and it can be awful. But that's probably part of maybe how I got the job hosting Cash Cab. Because I had been a driver for years, so driving and talking and whatever was second nature to me.
Right.
And it definitely helped. Plus when they called around looking, they decided they needed a comedian. They were like, we can't have this cab hosting the show. We need a personality. First they were like, let's find a cab driver who's got a good personality. And they looked, and they were like, this isn't working. Let's find a comedian. And so they went to the comedy clubs, and people at the comedy clubs knew that I was a driver because I would bring passengers into the city to go to dinner and a show or whatever, and I would go and do my stand-up sets while they were doing whatever they were doing. So I always had the limo with me, and I was wearing a suit, and so everybody knew that's what I was doing. So my name got in their heads kind of early because they said, oh, well, Ben Bailey is a driver.
So is there a most interesting person that you've ever given a ride to, either in the Cash Cab or in your limo?
That's an interesting question. A most interesting person. There's definitely a lot of really interesting people that got into the Cash Cab, but there were so many that it's difficult to pin down an interesting one. Now I'm thinking back to my days when I was driving a limo. I ended up going out with a woman that I picked up in the limo. I picked her up, so that was pretty interesting. And I once had a guy, I was working like 3 jobs and doing stand-up at night. So I was just exhausted all the time.
Right.
And I was falling asleep at the wheel, and a passenger said, pull over. Just pull the car over. And I pulled over, and he got out, and he came around and opened my door and said, get in the back. So I got into the back and lay down in the seat and went to sleep while he drove himself home. And he still gave me a big tip. He gave me like $20. He goes, he actually said he admired how hard I was working, and he thought the $20 would help, and the extra sleep would help, and he didn't mind driving. So he was pretty interesting in a very positive way. I'll never forget that guy. I could have lost my job over that.
So your Wikipedia page says that your stand-up subjects are listed as everyday life, self-deprecation, marriage, and pop culture. Would you say that those are accurate, or how would you describe your comedy?
Those are not accurate at all. I would say, I don't know how to describe my comedy. It's weird. People seem to do more specific things than I do. Like, my comedy is like, it's kind of like my taste in music. I always say that the only thing that songs that I like have in common is that I like them. And my jokes are kind of that way too. Like, I don't care it doesn't need to be about anything specific. It only needs to be funny. I have a new stand-up special. I don't know where it's going to come out yet because I haven't sold it yet, but it's done, and it's called Ben Bailey Live and Uncensored. And it's not a clean one like the last ones have been, so people should be ready for that.
Hence the uncensored, right?
Yes, I tried to put it in the name. I mean, my first bit on that, which is what made me think of it, you're asking, like, what topics. It's not really about anything at all. It's about how things are worded and playing with, different meanings of words with slightly different inflection. That's a weird answer. I don't even know what my own bits are about.
So, going off of that, what can fans at your show in Bethlehem, what can they expect to see from you?
They'll probably see a combination of material that I've written since I finished that special and material from that special. And I'll be improvising some stuff and just having some fun.